Welcome to the Tree Workshop. My name's Tim Kaye from Cultivating and Learning in Nature CIC. Come with me. We're just going to start off by looking at how to actually age a tree. Come this way. Oh, by the way, look at this. Come closer, Clive. There we are. Look. Can you see this? I don't know if you've ever come across it before. This is jelly ear, and it grows almost exclusively on elder. You can see why it's called jelly ear, can't you? Especially when you've got dead elder like this, which is decorticated, the bark's fallen off. Amazing stuff. You can eat it, but of course, you have to be very careful with eating fungi. Another thing I just noticed earlier is these little things. Absolutely amazing. Scarlet elf cups. Now, fungi are incredibly important because all these dead branches are helping to have been broken down by fungi like this. And they're recycling all those nutrients and putting them back into form that the trees can actually use. And North American Indians used to use them after childbirth, apparently. Amazing things. They're very, very common in about this sort of time of year, sort of later on into winter months. Now, we came here to look at how old a tree was. Now, if you look at this branch down here, this is a typical way you might age a tree. We look at the growth rings. Each ring indicates a year of growth for that tree. This is a bit of ash. You can even see that they are varied in their width. If you count them, you'll work out how old the tree is. You can actually say, for instance, that if it's a small growth ring, that they didn't put much growth that year, it might be in disease or something like that. But we don't actually want to cut down our tree. So instead, I'm going to show you a very simple way. Now, if you take this alder here, now this alder is a common tree that grows by riversides. All we need to do is you can get a tape measure. Now, any tape measure will do. You can even have a builder's tape measure. I'm just going to put my foot on the end of this tape measure here, right down near the base, measure up to 1.5 metres, 150 centimetres. If you've got some chalk with you, luckily enough, I've got some chalk just down here, and this is the chalk mark. So then what you need to do is measure around the tree, the girth of the tree, with your tape measure. Go all the way around. You can even do a bit of tree hugging in the way if you want to, but that is optional. Okay. Goes all the way around, and then you measure the distance that goes around the tree in centimetres. Now I'm working that out as 1 metre 85 or 185 centimetres. Now, for this type of tree, which grows fairly slowly, we're actually going to divide that figure by 2. Simple bit of maths, that will give you approximately 93 years old. Amazing, you've actually worked out how old this tree is. You guess that was a nice tree, it's a pretty big tree. Some trees, of course, like oak, can grow for 1,000 years. Other trees go at a much faster rate than that, so you'll have to work out what you divide it by. For instance, spruce trees would need to divide that figure you work out by 3. If you had a very, very slow growing tree like a yew or a holly, you just divide it by 1. Simple. At one point in my life, I did look at trees and had no idea what they were, what type of tree they were. Now I'm in a position where I know most, but not all of the UK's trees. And I'm going to take you onto a bit of a whistle-top tour of some of the commoner trees you can find in pretty much any habitat. Now, this one here, growing by the riverside, it's a very common tree with riversides. It's called an alder. A, not an E at the start. Lots of people get that confused. Now, if you come in closer, in winter time, the distinguishing feature of an alder, quite a close look at its buds. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but the actual buds of this twig here have this lovely plummy colour. They're alternate up the stem, and they have this lovely bluey purple sheen on them. This is a pretty easy one. It's quite distinctive. You might know it's holly. It has these waxy green leaves which are really good at repelling water and insect attack. The thing about holly is that its leaves are quite plastic in that they're quite variable. So you get these leaves here with hardly any prickles on at all, and others where perhaps it's more vulnerable, it has real big prickles. It also, of course, has the red berries, which is show-shaped with Christmas. You might bring a sprig of holly into your room at Christmas, and there's a lot of mythology regarding holly. So you should never cut down a holly unless you ask it first. And also, the holly wood is supposed to have power of animals, which is why some whips are made of holly. So it's quite an easy one, really. I think you should spot that one. Right, this is an ash. Now, ash is incredibly important for human history because it's actually strong and yet supple. The wood is strong and supple. It means it's useful for loads of types of things, especially good for making chairs or tool handles. You name it, you can make something from ash. As a tree in the ecosystem, it's actually quite weedy. It produces a lot of seed. Now, happen to have some seed here. These ash keys. All right. Now, ash keys produced in abundance in autumn, and they'll flutter down to the ground and colonise new ground. The key thing when you're in winter to identify ash, it's got quite a smooth greyish bark. It's also got these black buds. I don't know if you can see it there. They look a little bit like pencils. They're like a pencil lead on the twig there. When they get older, they do get more crinkly old bark, as opposed to these quite smooth ones when they're quite young. You'll often find them together with lots of ash coming down. Brilliant tree, and unfortunately with ash dieback we might not see very much of it in the future. One of our most popular trees, of course, is the oak. Everyone knows about what an oak looks like, or should do. Now, this specimen is pretty old. There's thought to some oaks will live for about 1,000 years. So they take about 300 years to establish themselves, 300 years to really mature, and then 300 years to die. Now, this one has a leaf shape like so. You're probably familiar with it. Has lots of these rounded edges, and of course in autumn it'll produce amounts of the acorn. Now, oaks like this are probably one of the most beneficial species for biodiversity. They're full of insect life and it will contain masses of invertebrates, and of course it's associated bird and mammal life. And this one, of course, if it was chopped down, in the past it would be used for building boats and houses. In some cases they still are. Now, this tree here is a very common one. It's called hazel. Now, hazel, you might know, it produces nuts in the autumn, but more characteristic for us, you can also see that it has multiple branches. Now, this is produced when hazel is chopped down at the base here. Instead of sending up one big trunk, it'll tend to send up lots and lots of little, quite thin branches. Will form these what you call copper stools. Now, copper stools in the past would be used for loads of different types of uses, like making fences and that sort of thing. Now we don't have so much use for them, but it's still an incredibly important plant, especially for wildlife. The leaf is pretty much round. I've got a very old, wrinkly old leaf here. It's pretty much rounded with a bit of a tip to the end. It's got a little bit of a point to it, and like the alder, which is quite cut off. Just to point out, of course, you often see these little lamb's tails with it. Not in this specimen, unfortunately, but this is an example of its lamb's tail catkins, which are prolific in some specimens, not this one. The bark tends to be quite variable, so it's not really a defining feature. You'll get your eye on with that as things go by. Now this one is one of the 3 sort of coniferous trees that are native to the UK. It's called the yew tree. Now, some specimens you find will have red berries, which are quite poisonous. But it's got these sort of needles, flattened needles, that are all over the tree. They remain there all year round. The thing about yew is that they can be incredibly old. Some of them have huge girths and are possibly over 1,000 years old. They also contain a chemical called Taxol, which is used in certain drug treatments for cancer. Now, I'm watching myself in this one because the defining feature of course, blackthorn is its huge thorns. They're covered all the way through the plant and they help it resist being eaten by herbivores, really. Watch out, they're known to go through tractor tyres. Now, the actual bark of blackthorn is typically quite black. It's quite dark, sort of coloured, and it flowers in about April, earlier than the hawthorn. So that's how you know it's a blackthorn, not a hawthorn. They both have thorns. The leaves are sort of fairly leaf-shaped, rounded, ovate shape. Refer to your worksheet on this, because of course we're in winter now. There's no leaves on it. They're also the food plant of the brown hairstreak butterfly. They lay a tiny, tiny little egg, looks like a sea urchin, in the crook of these little branches here, and it will emerge in the spring to feed on the blackthorn leaves. In the autumn, of course, it will produce the sloes, sort of berries about this size, that a good food source for birds and mammals. We associate willow with being in wet areas, and certainly is in this case by the river. Now, some willows have very long tapering leaves, but this one I'm going to show you isn't really characteristic of that. It has these more ovate leaves like this, more leaf basically shape. This is a goat willow. Now, goat willows are incredibly common in the UK. You'll get them just about anywhere. If you look very carefully at the bark, it has these little sort of almost diamond shapes on them, on the bark, all over it. Some of them are more stretched out than others, depending on age, but they have these really characteristic diamond shapes, and that's where you know it's going to be a willow. Now, willow, if you were to have a headache out in the wilds, what you could do is peel back the bark and chew it, because it actually contains salicylic acid, which is where we derive aspirin from. Now, this one is called the field maple. Now, if you look at the buds, they're actually in pairs, and the young twigs have these, I don't know if you can see this, but these striations up them. When they're older, field maple can have quite sort of corrugated, fluted sort of bark with lots of big striations, really big striations in it. This is the leaf, which is a characteristic sort of Canadian flag shape, but you can see it's field maple. It's not too big. It's got these rounded corners to it. So you can find it in most hedgerows and that sort of thing, but it can grow to a considerable size, but sometimes you just see it as a smaller shrub-like tree. The next tree we're going to look at is elder. Now, the leaves are just coming out on this one. You can see they're composed of alternate pairs, a little bit like ash leaves in that respect, but if you crush them, they smell like a mouse's cage. They're really musty smelling. Also, you've got these little bumpy bits on the young twigs, which is quite distinctive, and the older sort of bark is very cracked and gnarled. If you ever snap one off, you'll see it has hollow pith inside a lot of the younger twigs. Now, it's great for making elder whistles with, if you've ever done that. Of course, in springtime it produces the elder flowers, which are great for making elderflower cordial, that sort of thing. And of course, you get elder berries later in the year, good for birds to feed on. The classic hedgerow tree, hawthorn. Now, hawthorn is very, very similar to blackthorn in winter. Tends to be a little bit more spread out in terms of its branches. Doesn't look so stout. Still has the thorns, of course, but the characteristic really to look for is A, its bark is a lot less darker red. It's a bit more, yeah, a bit greyer in colour. Not that sort of deep black almost colour you get in the blackthorn. No, it's not black. The leaf, if you find one, of course, and it'll be green, of course, in summer, is a characteristic hawthorn leaf. It's deeply indented. They're a real, if you find those, you'll know it's a hawthorn. Of course, you can also look for the old red berries produced in autumn. Look for the red berries, they're very characteristic. And of course, you'll see it flowering in May. It's a bit variable in its flowering according to how the seasons are going and what temperatures are, but usually it flowers in May. There's a lot of mythology again around hawthorn, and for such a small tree, there's so many myths and legends surrounding it. Too much for this workshop today. Ever wondered how tall a tree is? It's really important for us foresters especially to work out the height of trees when they're working, and we can do that a number of ways. I'm going to show you one of the simplest ways you can. As long as you've got a tape measure, you can work it out. Now, all you have to do is go to the tree you want to measure the height of, like this, and then you walk away from it. Now, you get to a certain point, what you need to do is look between your legs. So put your head between your legs and look right to the top and see if you can see the top of the tree. I can't at this point, so what I'm going to do is walk a little bit further away. So keep on walking. I'm going to keep on looking underneath my legs. If I can see just the tip of the tree, and we're nearly there with this one, not quite. Avoiding the molehills and any other bumps in this field. Oh. So I'm going to look underneath legs, and I now can just about see the tip of the tree. So I'm going to mark this position. What I'm then going to do is measure from where I'm stood to the tree with my tape measure. You can do this on your own. Obviously, if you've got somebody to help you, it's even better. Okay, so that is about 6 metres. 6 or 7, no, 6 metres 50 this one. Which, if you look at the tree, you can probably work it out, is it likely to be about 6 metres 50? In this case, probably is. It's a bit of a guesstimate, it's not a really accurate thing, but it will give you an approximate height of the tree. There's other methods involving trigonometry and all sorts of weird and wonderful things, lots of maths, but this one, as long as you're not too flexible, seems to work really well. Well, I really hope you enjoyed your workshop on trees today. Hopefully you worked out how old a tree is, worked out how tall one is, and also looked at 10 of the commoner UK trees, possibly even 11. There's many more to look at, of course, but if you can identify 10, that's a really good start. I wanted us to leave you with a thought about what trees are actually good for. We know, of course, that they're very biodiverse places. In the tropics, for instance, they hold more species than anywhere else on Earth. Even in the UK, we get things like bluebell, which are not really found anywhere else, apart from in woodlands. You can, of course, get a job in the forestry industry. They provide jobs. And, of course, they provide timber and allow us to make countless different objects. Also, they give us things to eat. You only think about apples in Herefordshire. Well, you can go in to think about the almond industry in the US, for instance, which is worth £2.2 billion. And finally, of course, you've got the fact that they're really useful for storing carbon, which is really useful in the age of climate change. So, get out there, look at trees, get out in the woodland, because more than anything else, they're a beautiful place to relax and inspire us.